how you came to know about these principles and how they've transformed your life over the many years you've used them. I know we covered that a bit in the first time we talked with you, but we can just give a little brief summary again.
Yeah, sure. So, for me, being a drug addict was something I didn't want to be, but it was something that I couldn't stop doing every single day. And everybody in my life would tell me, hey, you have to stop, you have to stop, you have to stop. And the thing that I learned with addicts is you can tell them to stop until you're blue in the face, but nobody actually achieves recovery unless you tell them what to start instead. And so, I'd been kicked out of school, fired from my job, evicted from my home. My car was repossessed. My liver enzymes were through the roof. I was throwing up blood. And at the age of 23, I didn't think I'd live. And so when I got into rehab as my last gasp attempt to save my life, they told me what to start. And they gave me a 12-step program that's specifically designed to help an addict overcome their addiction. And so that became what saved my life, September 1st, 2002. And then as I grew in my career, I started to realize, wow, these principles are really effective at leadership. And most people are scared to practice them. And so for those of you who are not familiar with the 12-step program, there's 12 steps. It's a much more in-depth thing because an addict's trying to save their life. But what I did, and the reason that the 3 principles that Jade and Mercedes have taught you exist, is that's my way of trying to translate for the rest of the world what it means when a recovering drug addict is a leader, and how they lead themselves, how they lead their people, and how they lead their companies. And I'm very fortunate to be a serial entrepreneur and having been in all these different professional careers. And the one thing that's been consistent is without a college degree, without any connections or anything, these 3 principles made me a better leader than most, not because I'm special, but because they're special. And so, when I was preparing to do my TED Talk, I was really trying to figure out, how do I take these 12 steps, which is way too much for the average human to ingest, and how do I simplify this and make it really accessible to the average normie Mercedes? And it came out with these 3 principles. And then I would spend a week, a day, every week trying to teach it to people and refining how I taught these principles to people. And I started doing that about 4 years ago.
You really are getting good at summarizing your whole story there.
So if you want the very non-succinct version, that's essentially parts 1 and 2 of the previous podcast of the Majic Hour. I've got down into 2 minutes.
You worked your material.
Yeah.
I love it. So, and I do, we said it in the beginning, but I do highly recommend anyone wanting to know more specifically about your background story, obviously picking up your book or listening to those first 2 episodes or both. And because I want, for sake of time, I want to make sure we get to cover a lot about specifically how we remove this mask from our face, since we did a lot of working on the principles themselves. I want to get into what it even means to be wearing a mask, what does that look like in walking life so people can recognize it for themselves?
Yeah. So, and that's why the first principle is practice rigorous authenticity. And a lot of people these days are talking about authenticity. And it's what I like to call authenticity theater, or curated or selective authenticity. And, anybody can keep it real in front of grandma, but the question is do you keep it real when everything's on the line? And that is very different. And do you do it consistently? And so rigorous authenticity is the practice of being true to yourself in word and action in every circumstance, no matter the price. And for most of us, that is really scary. So I can't tell you how many times, and I've distilled this down to 4 different behaviors that we do, but where we say yes when we could say no. Okay. We say yes to a meeting, to a request from a friend, to our family wanting to live with us, whatever it is, we say yes to something we could say no to. And I know that behavior really well because as a drug addict, I said yes to something that I should say no to, and that was drugs. And so the second thing that we do is we hide a weakness. So for most of us, when we're wearing a mask, we're not practicing rigorous authenticity. It means we're hiding a part of us that's struggling, a part of us that needs help. In the professional world, it could be just the simple act of asking for mentorship or training. But in our personal lives, it's me going to my wife and saying, hey, I don't feel loved right now. I don't know. And I'm not sure. I feel like we're not connected. It's a willingness to actually step outside that mask and share your weaknesses. And then, 70%, and just in business alone, and this is true in personal life, 70% of employees at companies today are avoiding a difficult conversation with their boss, a coworker, or someone they manage. And that's before you start talking about customers. That's before you start talking about friends and family or all of Instagram. But we are avoiding difficult conversations all the time. And then holding back your unique perspective is so scary when the entire world can criticize what you have to say.
Yeah.
And for us, holding back our unique perspective feels safe, but it's the act of not leading ourselves, because leaders take unpopular stances. And so these 4 behaviors are the behaviors that I've identified that we engage in the most when we are not practicing rigorous authenticity.
Yes. And it makes me think of like trying to determine between subjective truth and objective truth as well. And like, I don't know, have you played in that world of how that comes up for you, of being able to determine what's your truth, getting to the core, why that's your truth? And then, okay, how do you figure out seeing what is actually the truth or reality? Since we often are creating our own, we are creating our own reality, but at the same time, there is reality happening. So,
you know what? So they told me when I got clean, you got to wear your recovery like a loose jacket. So I'm going to use a clothes metaphor. A lot of times I will look at clothes and be like, is this going to look good on me? And the only way I know is if I try it on. And I got to try on this, that. So first of all, I have a wide neck and short arms. So everything I wear is awkward. Nothing fits correctly. And so I have to try shirt after shirt after shirt to see what fits. Well, people say, how do I find my true self? I'll say, I don't know how to find my true self. I do know how to spot when I'm not being my true self.
okay.
And so to me, it's taking these 3 principles. We talked about practice rigorous authenticity. We'll talk about the other 2 in a second, but it's taking these principles and it's doing them over and over and over again. And so I'll give you a really practical example that is actually using these principles. After I did my TED Talk, for about 6 months, I thought I was Tony Robbins. And I just started like doing impromptu interventions on anyone that was telling me a problem that they had in their life. And so 3 of my best friends are all in recovery. And one of the things in recovery is we do not give advice. We only share experience and maybe give a suggestion, which is really like covert advice. And so after I did my TED Talk, I'm like, well, I'm going to practice rigorous health. I'm going to be super authentic. And I told them what I was thinking when they would tell me their problems. And each one over the course of those 6 months sat me down and said, Mike, you really hurt my feelings. It's kind of arrogant for you to think that you know what I should do. You didn't ask me any questions. You didn't share your experience. You just kind of told me what to do. And so I thought I was being my true self because I actually thought that I knew what they needed to do. But what I realized was that's what I thought. That's who I thought I was. That's what I thought I was. The guy I really want to be is the guy that's willing to be teachable and say, I may not have the answer and I want to listen. And also my best friends in recovery, they don't like that. And I want them more than I want to be the guy that intervenes on people randomly at the grocery store. So I think for me, it's a constant refining, and it's using the system that we're going to go through today, not once, but over and over and over again to spot the mask when we're wearing it, and then we can take it off.
Oh, I'm so glad I asked you that question, because I feel like that's just this frustration that anyone trying to do their own work and trying to sort through what's actually, the origins of their triggers and figuring out what's really going on inside of them has that struggle of, okay, I think I got the answer. And then you just like run with it. You become almost like a black and white opinionated, that's going to be it. And we forget that in order to grow, we have to be constantly a hypocrite, like we literally have to be a hypocrite over and over again and go, shit, I just learned a new truth, which means I'm a hypocrite because my old truth doesn't work anymore. And then be able to face that dissonance and move through it. And that is that like where you go from subjective truth to, okay, I see this is a new objective truth that you're realizing, integrate it. And then you're going to reach another one. And it's like, I can so resonate with what you just said. Like I am definitely been that person who wants to like preach the new wisdom and the knowledge. I mean, we made a whole podcast about it, who wants to
me too.
show something to the world, but then is like, wait, maybe I need to like practice this a little more in my own life and then also it's, my realization was more about trying to fix people and trying to essentially covertly attempt to fix them so that I'm not having to do my own stuff type of thing.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm glad I asked that one.
I'm glad you like the answer because I want to, dude, I want to be liked and valued by you.
Yeah. And this is one of the beautiful things about, working with you, Mike, and also just being able to interview you in front of people at this stage, but is that you will call yourself out like you just did, like that's something so simple like that, like your excitement on the fact that you got validation from an answer you gave that you were hoping, will work out here. But that ability to call ourselves out in that truth, like those little micro truths, I guess we can call them, is I think what builds up to getting really clear on what we need to be a clear channel, like for the world, or do that work that we're hoping to do in serving others and helping others to get to their own truths.
Totally, dude.
I see it. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I think where I struggle with mask wearing is when it comes to like doing things that align with your truth and are heart centered, and instead of like doing things that may feel forced, but like going along with it anyways, because it's like what may make the most sense, but it doesn't actually, like, there's that anxiety in your body because you know that like it doesn't feel right, but you're doing it anyways. Like that's a form of a mask. And then like people pleasing is a big form of a mask for me too. Like doing what, it can be anybody, like doing what may feel most comfortable for those around me, even if it makes me feel really uncomfortable. But I was thinking, one of my main jobs is I sell at like banquets. I sell raffle tickets to like raise money for nonprofits. And I love my job because I love raising money for nonprofits. And I love, I've been doing it for like almost 15 years. So I don't even have to think about it. It's like secondhand nature. So at this point, it's like easy to be top sales, but it is a bunch of girls like in the car with each other for hours on end, and it can also be very competitive because it's sales driven. So when you said having uncomfortable conversations, when you mentioned that, I realized that that is a lot of what we avoid in our job is like when there's an issue, people tend to go to the boss right away because first of all, it's a form of people pleasing because you're wanting to like impress her by coming to her with an issue because that means you're above the issue. Like, look, this person's doing this, which means like you're better than that situation. You're above that situation. You would never do that. So it's a form of people pleasing, but also if you would just go to the person directly and say, hey, I noticed that you get really heated when someone has sales higher than you, and this is a real situation, or like your BO is a little off the charts today and like you need to put more effort into that.
Your
Like
hygiene.
any situation like that.
Is it your hygiene?
Yeah, your hygiene. We all wear a tanner and most of us like to wear organic deodorant too. And we're hustling on this floor, but like if we would just go to each other and have the uncomfortable conversation, not only would it allow the other person to have more trust with us, but it would bring in us more. First of all, it would raise the empathy because we're having to go to them instead of just go to the boss and, get that person in trouble. But I just realized when you were talking about that, like that is the root of the issue that causes so much drama in my workplace is we're all avoiding the uncomfortable conversation of just being able to approach that person instead of doing what's best for us and going to the boss where we not only get to avoid the difficult conversation, but we get to be the people pleaser,
Yeah. Well, so
mask.
check this story out. And it's a way to bring in the other two principles. So the reason that we wear the mask is fear. And if someone's like, no, man, I'm not scared, but you're doing something that isn't true to you in word and action, I got news for you. You're just not in touch with your feelings. You're freaking scared. So I had a situation where I was building my first business. It was growing really fast. And I had hired my mom to be my director of finance. I'd actually interviewed her. She was like actually good at her job, I promise. But we were scaling and growing so fast that she wasn't keeping up and she was starting to cause problems. And so as someone who had worked at a large corporation, I'd learned that as a manager, when someone's not performing, you have to do a performance improvement plan. And when you roll out a performance improvement plan, or otherwise known as a PIP, when you roll out a PIP, it's either you're going to get better or we're going to have to fire you. Basically, you move up or you move out. And so here I am knowing that I have to PIP my freaking mom in my business. And I'm terrified. I'm worried that like anything from she'll leave and then I'll have to do her work to she'll never want to have me in her house again and she'll never call me son again. And so I'm scared. And that's why these three principles aren't three individual principles. That's why they work together as a system. We all want to take the mask off. We all want to say no, share the weakness, have the difficult conversation, share a unique perspective, but we're scared. Someone or something scares us. So that's where learning how to surrender the outcome becomes a muscle. And I'm not talking about like you hear it and you go, yeah, I should do that. I'm talking about like, if you want to be ripped, you got to lift weights every day. And it's just a muscle that you have to freaking build. And to this day, I have done 10,000 hours practicing surrender the outcome. I teach people all around the world how to do it. And I still struggle with it because it's the scariest thing to do. And so we're going to go through an exercise on how specifically you can do that. But if you can learn how to surrender what will happen, in this case, if I PIP my mom, if I just surrender what I'm scared of will happen, it allows you to do this thing called uncomfortable work. And most people's potential, whether it's personal, professional, or spiritual, is not realized and not actualized because they aren't doing their uncomfortable work. And a lot of people
Yeah,
are
and
like,
you
what are
can't.
you talking about, Mike? I work hard. I work smart. I'm like, that's not uncomfortable work. Anyone has seen someone doing 8 hours of hard or smart work, avoiding 10
Mhm.
minutes of uncomfortable work, having that very difficult conversation in one moment, and then doing all this other stuff out of the other moment. And so if we use these three principles, we can take that off. So what are you going to say, Jade?
I think there's such an important piece of surrendering the outcome, of making sure you're still doing it in integrity, because you can say surrendering the outcome and it give you an excuse to, well, if they get pissed, so what? Or if I hurt their feelings, so what? I'm surrendering the outcome. And it's a unique situation with you and your mom because you're above her. But say with the example I gave with the job, because we're all equals. And it's important that we see others as our equal anyways. I think that it's so important to ask ourselves before the difficult conversation, how can I express my truth in a way that's helpful for the other person? Not just, well, I'm just going to express my truth and I'm going to surrender the outcome. So however they take it, that's on them. Instead, going at it with integrity and saying, how can I say this in a way that's truly helpful for them and not act like I'm above them, but and not act like I'm their boss and telling them like this is what they need to do or this is a change they need to make, but saying, hey, this is something I noticed and this is why I think it's helpful to tell you. And I hope that, you take it knowing that I have your best interest at heart. I think that is like an important piece of surrendering the outcome, is making sure it's still with integrity and empathy.
And you're illustrating why, when we teach people to do surrender the outcome, we have them focus on what they can't control and what they can. Because, like, so you go with my mom, right? I couldn't control that she wasn't performing, and I couldn't control that my job as CEO was to pit my mom. I couldn't really control that because it was going to happen one way or another. I could control how thoughtful I was in preparing for the conversation. I could control when I had the conversation, where I had the conversation, how I had the conversation, whether or not I asked someone to role play with me before, so I could make sure that I was really thoughtful and stern, but loving at the same time. And I also could control whether or not went in with this idea of surrendering her emotional reaction. And so there are a lot of times we're scared of how something's going to go. And human beings by nature waste about 50% of our energy worrying about things that we can't control. I mean, hello, we just had an election in this country, and regardless of your political affiliation, after you cast your vote, you had no control. And how much time did we waste watching the news, reading the news, or whatever? And so if you can reallocate that energy to what you can control, exactly what you said, being intentional, being thoughtful, and being able to communicate more effectively, by surrendering the outcome and focusing on what you can control and ignoring what you can't, you actually allow yourself not only to do more uncomfortable work, but to be more successful in achieving the outcomes that you want to achieve. But it's antithetical to what we're taught. We're not actually taught that we should be authentic, but people are kind of like, rising up and saying we should be, we just don't know how to be. And we know we should do uncomfortable work. Like, we know we should eat healthy. We know we should save money. We know we should work out. I know I shouldn't be on my smartphone around my kids. Like, we know these things, but no one really teaches us to surrender the outcome. And it's the hardest thing to do because it goes completely in opposition of our fight or flight response, which is so wired into who we are. And that's why it takes such intentional discipline to build a muscle to offset it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, coming to things with that background work is so important, and then it is about letting it go at that point. What happened with your mom?
Oh yeah. So yeah, she punched me in the face and I haven't talked to her since. No. She luckily, she's gone now, but she was a recovering addict too, and she's the one that taught me how to recover. So one of the people. So luckily we had this language in common. And so she told me, I am so angry at you right now. But I can't control how you see my performance, but I can control if I do something about it. And then, because she was able to communicate that truth to me right then and there, we were able to then have further conversations. And instead of spending all her energy on being a victim or telling me why I sucked or us getting into drama, we started talking about how she could grow, and she did. And so she grew, and we were acquired by a huge company. And after a year, like a lot of us transitioned out, but I mean, she was part of our success. And a big part of it was that we had these principles in common.
Yeah. Is there times when that goes wrong for you? Like, I'm sure in business, you've experienced the opposite. Your mom happened to have some wokeness there. Sounds like.
Yeah. I'm thinking right now specifically about, I had a contact. So when I was building my company, I worked with executives at health systems for hospitals. And I had a guy that was super high up at one of the largest health systems. And he and I had always got along. They used our software, all that kind of stuff. And so I approached him about an endorsement for my book. And he replied and said, and like basically read me the riot act and said, I can't believe that you're commercializing your recovery. And he's not a recovering addict, but he criticized me. And so I had two options. I could say nothing. I could indulge in anger reaction, or I could be really vulnerable and be like, man, like, it hurts me that you would think that. I don't mean any disrespect. Here's the financial model that we're working on. I'm not making a dime right now. Like, I went into all that stuff, and his reply was, take me off your list forever. And I haven't talked to him since. And you know what? Like, I would say that I wanted to wear the mask of hiding my unique perspective because he didn't like what I was doing. And then I wanted to wear the mask of hiding a weakness and saying, well, I'm struggling with this too, and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, hey, like, he's not my mom, but maybe this will work out. And that relationship's toast. It's burnt. It's gone forever. And so I think that when I got clean, they told me getting sober or clean will not solve all your problems. If you have 10 problems, it's not going to solve those 10. But if you have 20. So like, it'll help you. And so living and leading mask free, taking the mask off, does not mean that there won't be damage. There is damage. Like I in my book, my last chapter talks about damage that can happen. I ended up having to give my ex-wife a tremendous amount of money, like as part of me wearing masks and all, and taking the mask off and all this kind of stuff. But those things are usually few and far between. It's unavoidable that people will reject us. It's unavoidable that things will go wrong. We can't control that we will experience failure in this earth. We can control whether we lead ourselves, conserve our energy, and manifest the potential that is uniquely inside of each and every one of us. We can control that. And the cost of that is we are going to lose some relationships. We're going to have some really awkward moments, and we're going to get some serious backlash. I had someone that called me a sociopath in one of my YouTube videos. It's not stopping me from carrying this message, dude. But I want to tell you I didn't get hurt by it or bothered by it. I was. But that's the cost of doing business. And so that's the cost of taking that mask off. And you know what? The battles, when you lose them, they suck, but the war is totally worth it.
Yeah.
How many army, analogies or metaphors can I use here?
I'm part of I'm subscribed to your text, Monday text messages. And one of the things you've been talking about lately is how you focused on the detractor in one of your seminars or one of your talks. And it got you all caught up in trying to convince this one person that was obviously having he was the detractor. He was in, what do you call it? Like denial or defensive of he's just not on board. Right.
Yeah.
So, and then you realized, maybe you can tell that story, I'm sure, a lot better than I can, but yeah, that then you ended up realizing like, why the fuck am I focusing on? My energy is going to this thing. And of course it's making it grow.
So it was like masks upon masks. So homeboy was like not going to ever be down with the mastery program. Okay. He was like good old Southern, arms crossed, like I'm stronger than God, and he was just never going to be into it. And the sad thing is when I was doing this workshop, there was a guy that I wanted to like do what I do is I'll coach one person to coach everybody. So there's a lot of risk because if that person sucks, the whole thing goes off the rails. There was a guy that I wanted to coach in front of everybody, and he was sweet. But then there was this guy with the crossed arms, and my brain said, if I can't convince crossed arms dude that this is like a great way to do this, then nobody's going to think that this is for real, that like mask free is an effective leadership strategy. And I like completely resisted all of my natural impulses. And so I tried to go coach dude with the crossed arms that didn't like it. He's like, I have no mask. I have no problem. And I'm like, what the F do I do now? And I looked at Brooke on my team, like, what do I do? And she's like, I got nothing for you. And I spent like 30 or 40 minutes, like, which is a sixth of the time of the workshop trying to convince him. And then later in the workshop, so it went off the rails. And later in the workshop, I coached the guy that I wanted to, and it was beautiful. And he was like, man, I've got a CFO that's my good friend, and I haven't been having difficult conversations with him. And he went into all this stuff. So God gave me an opportunity to learn the lesson, and I didn't learn it. 2 days later, I'm in a workshop where the first group was the CEOs of companies. The second group is their like CFOs and directors of HR. And luck would have it that the director of HR for the person that I wanted to coach was also someone I wanted to coach. And I again didn't coach the person I wanted to coach because she said, no, why don't you coach this other guy? And the other guy like literally just stared at me with a blank face. Like, I don't have any problems. And I'm like, what is wrong with me? Why am I going to try to convince the detractor at the expense of this entire experience? And so then I went and did 6 more workshops in Denver the next week. And that time I learned the lesson. I'm like, okay, I have to change my thinking. I'm not here to convince everybody. I'm here to find the one person that wants to change their life and change how they lead. And I need to spend time with them. So now I'm not going to spend time with that person to help everybody else. I'm going to spend time with that person because that's why the fuck I'm here. And I surrendered whether we would get leads. I surrendered what they would think. I surrendered the detractor over there that I want to go convince. And I would go zero in on the person that would be down. And sure enough, we were averaging like 1 lead per workshop for a company to bring us in for training. And by the last training for 11 CEOs, I had 8 out of 11 ask me to come in and train their leadership teams on this stuff, simply because I stopped trying to convince all the freaking detractors and just hold on the people that my message is for.
Yeah.
I will never stop relearning this, by the way, ever.
Yeah,
this is going to be a loop.
I love that you're in the anger of it too. Like, it's a frustration to be coming up against it again and again, because you only can point at yourself like, damn it, like I'm the problem, like I keep calling in this person essentially, and I keep trying to convince them of their own potential.
It's like, why? Like, why am I doing that? And the truth is, it's insecurity. It's trying to control everybody. And I won't stop. But what I hope is when I'm able to spot it faster, can get better faster, and then I don't do as much damage.
Yeah, beautiful.
I want to talk about why addicts have more of an advantage to living mask-free.
Sweet. I love talking about that. But let me tell you all the things I want to convince you of that you're not convinced of. So it's really simple.
I'm the wrong person because you'd probably convince me on all of them.
Well, then I would tell myself that I have to find someone in the audience that hates me, and then I have to convince them.
Yeah.
And so just completely use all my energy in the wrong way. So I think that here's the thing. I think we're now at a place where, command and control leadership came from the military, and the world is our military is no longer effective in its old command and control style, let alone our leadership structures. So people want authentic leaders, they want authentic employees, they want authentic companies and brands, but they don't really know how to do it. And the people that are in charge want to be authentic, but it's still too freaking risky, and they don't really know what to do. So the reason that a recovering addict has an advantage is for 2 reasons. Reason number 1, I have the motivation that the average leader does not, because before I ever became a leader, I was told that I had to practice rigorous authenticity, surrender the outcome, and do uncomfortable work, or I would fucking die. And so the way I describe it is, even with 18 years clean, I walk around this earth with a loaded gun pointed at my head that says, if I don't practice these principles, I'm headed down the direction of relapse. It could be, at this point in my recovery, 5 years, but I start building the muscle of not practicing these principles. I go back out, I die, and my kids have no father, right? Like, that is a legitimate track that I've seen my fellow addicts go down. So I've got way more of an excuse than, hey, we might get better results as a company, or my employees might like me better. I don't care about any of that. I want to live. And so millions of addicts around the world are practicing a 12-step program in every country and every language. And they're going to meetings and they're practicing these principles, not because it's a good thing to do. Like, eating organic is a good thing to do. They're doing it because they'll freaking die if they don't. So I have a motivation that most normie leaders don't have. Number 2, addiction is a terminal disease when not treated, and it isn't ever actually cured. It's just managed. And so it is a catastrophic, devastating disease that affects most of the people on this earth in some way. In a pandemic, finally, everybody understood what it was like to be isolated by a disease. And so one of the silver linings to this is that means that there are resources and places for recovering addicts to go to congregate in 12-step meetings and rehab centers and all these other kinds of places where we literally practice these principles. Like, people think we go into a meeting and for an hour we complain about wanting to use. Like, no, we talk about how we apply these 3 principles to life. Like, literally, I talked to my sponsor about the workshop where I try to convince the detractor. He's like, sounds like you were trying to control the outcome. I'm like, no, I wasn't. He's like, okay, yeah, you were. and so addicts, we have, like, when we first get clean, we have to do 90 meetings in 90 days. That means every day I have to go to an academy for training me on how to use these principles. And then they tell me if I don't continue to go to this academy to practice this and learn from all these people that are experts, I'm going to freaking die. And so the average leader doesn't have motivation and they don't know where to go to get this training. And meanwhile, as an addict, I'm desperate. So I go to a 12-step meeting in the back of some church somewhere. And so for a crappy cup of coffee, an hour of my time, I learned how to be a better leader than most Fortune 500 CEOs. And so that's it. Anybody can do it. And that's my mission, is to make it accessible to all. But if you will not have the same motivation if you're not a recovering addict, because it's not life or death.
Yeah.
That's why my book says not lead like addicts, live like addicts. The reason that we lead the way we do is because of how we have to live.
This might be too broad of a question because it's obviously situational, but why do you think some addicts that go and hear this message don't move into that mindset and allow, themselves to believe that they can do what you're doing?
So the elephant in the room question, which I'm grateful you asked, and that is, if this is so great, why do like 90% of addicts not get it and do it and relapse and end
It's
up
like the
hurting
majority of
people?
them.
So when I was in rehab, they told us all to get up in a circle and put our arms on each other. And they said, we want you to look around this room and know that 9 out of 10 of you are going to relapse. And so as you look around this circle, look at for who the people are that you think are going to relapse, and know that everybody's looking at you. And so I was like, wow, okay, that's pretty discouraging. But they were really trying to help me understand, like, this is life or death, and that it is not likely that an addict will stay clean. Well, what I have learned since is it's not a 90% chance that an addict will relapse. It's a 90% chance that we won't follow directions. These programs work, but as an addict, I want to control. I'm obsessed with controlling my destiny, my fate. I want to feel the way I want to feel. I want to get what I want. I want to do what I want. And so when I walk into a program, I have to do everything that is opposite of my nature. And I'm fighting muscle memory. I'm essentially fighting the muscle memory of instant gratification, trying to trade it for long-term gratification. And I personally believe that addicts suffer from a variant of obsessive compulsive disorder, where we're obsessed with being able to control how we feel. And when you go into a 12-step program and you take the drugs away and you start working the steps and looking at yourself, you're going to feel some shit you don't want to feel. And most people will default to their patterns, their muscle memory that they've been building up for. I know a guy, Dave C, that he would always talk about, I'm getting clean for the first time at like age 52. I feel like I'm so old to like get clean, but now he's like 68. He's got 16 years. And he had to fight half of a century's worth of programming for it to work. So I wish I could say, what is the step-by-step on how to be the addict that's willing to do it? I honestly don't 100% know. What I do know is if they don't have enough of a bottom and they're not motivated enough, they're not going to be willing to do all that stuff. And then number two, if they're not coachable and they're not willing to just do the program as described, then they will not usually stay clean or sober. And unfortunately, 9 out of 10 of us try to do it on our own in some way. I took a call from a guy that was like, Mike, I want to get sober. I want to get clean. And I'm like, well, have you gone to meetings? Like, yeah. I'm like, do you have a sponsor? He's like, no. He's like, I just think the program's bullshit. I'm like, have you ever gotten a sponsor? Have you ever worked the steps? He's like, no. And I'm like, then you don't know. You can't call it bullshit because you haven't worked the program. He's like, well, I want to do it my way. I'm like, I know. How's your way working? They tell us your best thinking got you here. And anyway, I could go off on this forever, but the problem is that we think that we know better and we don't want to follow directions, so we don't stay clean.
Yeah. And that for me as a normie, quote unquote, which I believe we all have some sort of addiction. I think we've talked about this before, and I can name many of mine. But for me, thinking of it from the perspective of like, what do I run to when I feel discomfort? That's really the question, and why do I run away from accountability? Well, because then I have to, if I ask myself to be accountable to something and then I show up and I have a sponsor that's making, forcing me, or not forcing me because no one can force me, but someone who's asking me to show up more fully in the pain and actually feel it, that's terrifying for me because I'm a scared child at the end of the day. We all are. And so putting the accountability in place or the sponsor in place is the factor that makes the program work, a large part of it. But I have to show up for the accountability in the first place. And I think that's like what I'm getting from you when I hear you answer that question is like this piece of responsibility is what it is. Like, I think so many of us just go, oh, we're going to, blame the world around us or victimize ourselves in order to not take responsibility for feeling pain. And that's the terrifying thing, is that we actually have to feel pain in order to move through it. And that's like the thing that I feel like addicts, anybody is trying to struggle with in this walk in life, because it is uncomfortable. But the people who are able to take responsibility for their own pain, sit with it. Like for me, what comes up is like pain, anxiety, depression, addiction, when I have to feel those feelings in me, I literally see myself like trying to, I don't even know, for me, it's like watch a show, go shopping, ask my husband to like comfort me in some way, like all these things, which some of those, yes, you can use at some degree, but at some point you have to sit actually with the pain and feel what's going on, and then, move from that place and take responsibility for where it's coming up in you, because it's in you. Like, it's not, you know what I mean? It's in you. Do you want to say anything on that?
I mean, I agree with you, but the two things that came up just as you were saying that is, I think if I were to more succinctly answer Jade's question, it's that addicts have trouble, like everybody else, surrendering the outcome. And that means surrendering how you feel, surrendering how this is going to go. And then to your point, Mercedes, I was just thinking, we are really in a messed up era for humanity, because the functional value and the utility of pain is to get a human being to stop something. Like, that is the reason that we have pain, is to get us to stop something. But we're no longer out there like worried about a tiger, jumping out from behind the bush. Well, I mean, maybe, but like a lot of us, unless there's tigers in most of the suburbs in this world. Actually, I saw that there was one recently. So forget if you're the person that was in that suburb, forget it. But the basic existential threats that we had to suffer through, that we had to work through, we've really, elevated Maslow's hierarchy of needs for a large percentage of the world. Obviously not everybody. And so pain's value is to stop you. And we just have a really dysfunctional relationship with it, because it doesn't help us, because now it's like psychological pain. And it stops us the same way physical pain does, but it's really not helpful.
Yeah.
Maybe
And
it's
so
helpful. It's not helpful.
Think of it that way.
Completely. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I think we had a lag here because I was hearing all three of us at once. I think that makes more sense thinking of it as like controlling the pain, because for me, and I mean, there's definitely things I feel addicted to, but I don't have an addiction to a substance. But I feel like these steps would give me more sense of control than a substance, except for when it comes to pain. So that makes more sense when you put it that way. Like, it's a control when it comes to pain.
And they do. Like, you're right, they do. The problem is that working the steps subjects you to more pain than numbing yourself, because you have to have the difficult conversation as opposed to not do it, or like in 12-step program, to do a 4-step inventory or make amends. And so, but the thing is that that's what forces you to learn how to deal with it. And then you like become this great person. But for a lot of us, and for me, there was a period of time where I almost relapsed. It's easy to do when I'm inspired. It's really hard to maintain. Novelty will always help become like some sort of anesthetic towards that pain. That's why, like, I guess the Tony Robbins firewalk at the end, right? But the real question is, the person that did that firewalk, how are they living 15 months later when there's no more novelty, there's no more high out of doing it, whatever it is that they're supposed to be doing, and life in life's terms is hard. And that's where it becomes really hard. We see that, we call it the pink cloud in a 12-step program. After a year, a lot of people come down off of this pink cloud because now that's not new anymore.
That makes so much sense. That's really almost an addiction to novelty in that sense, where we want newness to distract us from feeling again. It's again, just trying to not feel pain, not feel fear. And it makes me think of, well, I wanted to touch actually before I move on to my next question here about what you said about sponsors, because there's a program like, you've worked this 12-step program, you have your own mask-free community and process and program in place for people to walk through and have that accountability that has some structure to it and has some ability to keep you coming back, knowing if you're doing things, in a process. And we get, like, you're talking about the addict who was like, I'm doing this my own way and I want to do it myself, and didn't want to call in that accountability factor. It is a thing that happens. I notice, like, where we get comfortable asking our questions to the wrong people, or to ourselves a lot of the time too. Not necessarily like we want to trust ourselves, but we know that there are things in us that we're still like gaslighting ourselves. You know what I mean? We're not necessarily trustable yet in some way. So do you see that, maybe you can relate it more to normies in this situation, because I know this wasn't a call specifically about addicts, but maybe you can cross that bridge over for us and tell us how when you're asking the right person a question, maybe, or, finding a sponsor that works for you.
So I love that question. So, because whether you're an addict or not, I think we're living in a world where most people are either intentionally or unintentionally seeking some level of confirmation bias. They want someone that's going to say, yeah, you're right, or what you think is, what you feel is right, what you think is right. And so in recovery, we call that looking for someone to co-sign your bullshit. And one of the examples I have that's not about addiction, that's just like what I think a lot of people go through, is I had a perfectly good paid for Honda Accord in early recovery. And yet I wanted something new and intoxicating, and I didn't want to get high. So I wanted to get like a nicer car. And so I went and called one of my good friends who is literally the worst person in the world with money and said, what do you think I should do? And he said, get the car, man. It's just money. And he's in crazy debt, can't save a dollar. Like, I knew what I was doing. And so another version of this that, let's say, is, not about money or car, is calling the friend when someone has hurt you that is just going to agree with you that other person is an a-hole. Like, they're not going to ask questions. They're not going to do anything, versus calling the person that you want to call when you say, I don't know what my part in this is. And so I think for us, a big part of that is, are you willing to be wrong? Are you willing to experience the pain of being wrong? Not because you are, but are you willing to be inspected? And so, like, I am very intentional these days where I won't call the person that will just agree with me when I'm going through something. I will call the person that will lovingly help me arrive at the most objective understanding of my part and someone else's part in something. I don't want the person that tells me I'm wrong all the time, and I don't want the person that tells me I'm right all the time. I want the person that has me and my growth's best interest at heart. And I think if you seek people in your life, whether they're a sponsor or a friend or a teacher that you can go to on a regular basis, that can say, man, I've been there before, and here's some of the questions I had to ask myself, and you're open to that answer, that's real accountability.
Do you have experiences where, maybe on both sides of that, because I think this is such a good place that, as humans just walking in life with each other, and we're trying to, do our best at that. And I think, one of our most important things as humans that we all want is connection and community, and be able to have these, deep relationships and tribe and such. Do you have experiences that maybe you can share on both sides of that, where you're maybe sponsoring someone, for instance, and trying to give them that loving, mirror, or however you want to say, you're being a mirror for them, and they retaliate? And then maybe on the other instance where you've retaliated, because you shared earlier in our conversation where you went to your sponsor and they're like, yeah, you rejected what they told you. Essentially, you were like, no, I'm not doing that. And they're like, okay. And then you had to look at that later, because they called you out on it. The thing I'm trying to get to is, how do you keep coming back with a sponsor or your accountability factor to know that this person has your best interest at heart and is loving? You know what I mean? Like, or that you, as the sponsor for someone, how do you tell them, I'm here to help you? Like, this isn't to hurt you. Yeah.
I think this would be hard, for some people to accept, but for me, I don't trust people. I trust the process. It's like, you gotta trade one P for the other. I trade people for the process. Human beings are imperfect, failed in many ways beings, that even the best people can have a really bad day where they have bad intentions. So to me, it's not about one moment. It's about the body of work. It's about, if I constantly go to this person. So like, I had a friend where every time I would go to them about my TED Talk or my book, they would start telling me why I shouldn't do it, because they were scared that they were going to lose me as a friend if I became successful. I didn't know that initially, but I was like, I would get off of every call and be like, why does this feel so bad? Meanwhile, contrast that with when I was trying to decide whether I should divorce my first wife after I'd found her lying yet again. And I went to a really good friend of mine and said, I can't tell if I'm supposed to be loyal and stay, or if it's time to respect myself and go. And the entire time he'd been like, what's your part? What's your part? What's your part? So I'd really trusted him. And this time he said, I'm wondering what it's going to take, why you don't see that you need to go. But it's because in like 10 previous conversations, he had asked me what my part was, that I was able to really trust that he wasn't doing the friend thing of like, I'm just on your side and I'm giving you like simple advice. And so to me, it's about the process. It's about the body of work. It's not about one transaction. It's about all the transactions and the themes that come as a result. And so like, I had my first sponsor in 12-step recovery, seemed like a good dude, really liked him. And every time I called him, he would just talk about how much money he was making. And I was like, I'm pretty sure this is not what this is supposed to be about. And then I asked him to go over my step and he kept canceling on me. I'm like, I'm pretty sure this isn't how this is supposed to go. And so, after a while, I see the body of work. I'm like, okay, this isn't the best fit for me. Then I get a sponsor that, is loving and shows up and takes me through the steps. And I go into his house and I say, you have a great house. He's like, dude, this isn't my house. It's on loan from God and you can take it any moment. And I'm good. And I'm like, I want what you have. And then, I keep having these moments with him and it's clear that his best, to me, it's his focus. Let me say this a different way. I think a lot of us we want to be around people that are like us. I don't. I want to be around people that want to become what I want to become. And that's very different. I don't want people that are just like me. I want people that are committed to growing, to being better than they are because of two reasons. A, that's my personal bias. I'm not saying that's how everybody should work. But number two, if you're growth oriented, that means that you're not going to just sit there and believe your own hype forever. You may do it in the first conversation, you may do it in the second conversation, but eventually you're going to own your part. I just got into a verbal altercation with a good friend of mine yesterday, but not like an altercation, that makes it sound very violent, but like a debate, and where we both upset each other, but we immediately were able to say, hey, you know what, this is what I think my part in this is. And we both did that. And that's what makes us trust each other. And I always go back to, if it's like, I always believe what I always believe, and I want everybody to believe what I believe, then I don't trust me and I don't trust you. But if I'm willing to challenge what I believe and you're willing to challenge what you believe, and collectively we're going to challenge what we believe so that we can become better, I trust you a lot, even if we have moments that suck. Does that make sense?
Yes. And it is always back to that. What's the real question at the end of the day? Do you want connection with the other person, right? And then it's like, if both say yes, then we can move from there.
Yeah, but it's about the process, not the person.
It's hard to get there. The process is how.
Yeah, the process is messy.
Yeah. Okay, so we have gone down many rabbit holes, which I absolutely loved. I'm so glad I asked some of those questions, and Jade had some in there too that I think were really, really powerful. So thank you for playing with us in those arenas. But I want to bring us back to this mask wearing thing, because when I was working with you directly, one of the most important and powerful mantras that I took away from working with you and that you ever gave me, and you spoke these words to me, and I was like, I remember the moment, I was like, yeah. And for me, of course the context made it hit, but hopefully it will for someone else. And you said action over insight, Mercedes. Like, you need to be focusing on action over insight, because I'm a person who can spin in the intellect of it. I can fucking understand it. You know what I mean? But to get it into my experiential body and to actually integrate it, I have to actually make some moves. I have to create action. So how do we take action to begin removing our mask? I guess that's really what the question is here. And maybe how you came about the action over insight mantra.
I learned that from 12-step recovery. That's literally a saying that we had. So I'd love to take credit for what I told you, but I was just passing on something that was good. But that was huge for me, because when I got clean, my sponsor said, you can't be too stupid to stay clean, but you can be too smart. And he said, you don't need to ask me why, just ask me how. And what I learned was, especially in today's age where we have access to a lot of information, you can get so paralyzed in your head and make this so philosophical that you don't actually go take action. And we don't really know what's real until we go take action. It's all theory until we go take action. So I think this might be a good foray or transition into the action card potentially, because for me, it is always better to be thoughtful, ask for some perspective from people I trust, and then go take an action, because I will get more information from that action. I will find out what works for me. From a business perspective, a mentor of mine said, why make tomorrow's decisions with today's information? Get as much information as you can. The way you get information is you take action. So for example, if you are trying to find the perfect love, the thing isn't to obsess over the match.com profiles, is go on a bunch of dates. Find out who you connect with and what you like, right? So for me, it goes to, how do I break this down into really small steps that are really clear, so that these things that I'm throwing around my head, these things that I want to do to grow or be better or whatever, instead of them being these massive thought processes, how do I go break them down to small steps, take a simple action, reflect, and then do it again, so that I can start to create serious momentum towards whatever it is that I care about, or just learn that it didn't matter. I once started a business where I spent so much time writing it on paper. And then literally the first step I took, I was like, oh, I don't want to run this business. It was a complete waste of time. And then my first date with my wife, I came back and even my mom was like, you're not going to marry the first person that you go on a date with after you're divorced, Michael. Let's be real. I'm like, yeah, I know. I'm just going on dates. Well, guess what? Ended up being my wife. So I think there's so much power in mastering the process of taking little steps of action rather than over analyzing. And so I don't know if do you want to go into the action card?
Yeah, that's what we're up with next. So I'm going to attempt, for those of you watching, to put this on the screen share, but I will warn you, this is my first time trying to do that, really. So bear with me on that. And as I do that, Michael, if you will walk us through the what the action card is in itself, and then verbally walk us through for the people who are listening on the podcast as well.
Okay. So I was talking to someone the other day about this, and I am someone that is very uncomfortable ever saying something positive about myself because I don't ever want to be seen as arrogant. But I've grown faster than all of my mentors that I've ever worked with. And it's not because I'm special. It's because I did a specific thing every day for the last 10 years that is so freaking simple, but it'll change your life. And what it solves is the problem of, hey, Mike, I learned something new that I want to do in a book or a TED Talk or whatever, or New Year's resolution, but I can't manage to keep doing it. And so what psychologists will tell you is that consistent awareness is all you need for change. But for us, it's hard to keep consistent awareness. So what we're going to do is we're going to work this thing that we call a mask-free action card. And what we do with this card is we essentially memorialize a place where we need to take off our mask to live a better life, to reclaim time, to reclaim connection, whatever. And all we're going to do is read this card once a day for 28 days. And by reading it, we will learn more about ourselves than we could sitting in a room thinking about what we need to do to become X, Y, and Z or to solve a problem. So I'll make it like tangible for you. So the first step is you have to decide what mask you're wearing. So right now, think about it in your life. Are you saying yes to someone when you should say no? Are you hiding a weakness? Are you struggling with something? You're not asking for help. Is there a difficult conversation that you're avoiding with someone at work, someone at home, your partner? Or is there a unique perspective that you're not sharing with the world because you're scared of what people will think? And so on this card, the first thing that you write down is just practice rigorous authenticity, and underneath it, the mask that you're struggling with. So literally you just write, I say yes when I could say no. I hide a weakness. I avoid difficult conversations, or I hold my unique perspective. One of those four, not all of them. You perfectionists out there will try to do all of them, not all of them, just one of them. And it doesn't even need to be perfect. Just write it down. And here's why that act in and of itself is so powerful. Up until 80 years ago, if you were an alcoholic or a drug addict, you were going to end up in a jail, institution, or death. But what ends up happening is a bunch of alcoholics and addicts sat in a circle and they said, hi, I'm Mike, I'm an addict. There's so much power in saying what you're addicted to. And my theory is we're addicted to saying yes when we could say no. We're addicted to hiding weaknesses. So the first step is just practice rigorous authenticity. Write on a very small piece of paper. If you have a card, practice rigorous authenticity. I say yes when I could say no. So that's number one. You're owning your challenge. Then the number two problem is, okay, well, if you need to say no, if you need to share your weakness, if you need to have that difficult conversation, if you want to share that unique perspective, the thing that's stopping you is fear. So how do you surrender the outcome? And what you do is you write number two, surrender the outcome, underneath where you wrote practice rigorous authenticity. And I want you to draw a line down the middle, just like a couple lines down the sheet, maybe halfway down the sheet, and put can't control in the top left and put can control in the top right. And just list one thing that you can't control and one thing that you can control about the outcome that you're worried about. So Mercedes, do you remember the card that you did?
Yes.
So let's give the listeners an example.
Yeah, I'm trying to kind of go over it right now in my head and I'm writing it down. So my mask was saying yes when I should say no. And it was about what I can't control is if people will love me or not if I don't say yes to everything.
Yep.
What I can't control was, I don't remember my specific card, but let me just think about it in the moment.
I think I remember.
You do? Go for it.
I think so. So like your challenge was you had so many different people that you wanted to help or interact with that you were having trouble saying no to certain groups of people. And so it was, I say yes when I could say no. And so you couldn't control that you wanted to say yes. You couldn't control, and I don't remember which one of these it was, but you couldn't control that people were asking, but you could control if you focused on who you wanted to help.
Yeah. I could control what I decided to spend my energy on, essentially. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And so like that. And so, and again, for anyone that's going along with us, you can reach out to me through michaelbrody-waite.com if you have a question, like, and you're struggling, but like the key here is this is not about perfection. It's about practice. So you're going to write a jacked up card. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you right now, because every card I write is jacked up. the question is, do you get in the practice of doing this every day? So you've written down your mask. I say yes when I could say no. I can't control that. I have endless opportunities, or a lot of people are going to ask me for my time. I can control what I focus my time on. If your mask is hiding a weakness, you can't control that you have the weakness. You can control if you do something about it. If you're avoiding a difficult conversation, you can't control how someone will respond. You can control how you approach them, how you communicate, like the example we used with Jade. And with your unique perspective, just like with me, that with the detractors in my workshops, you can't control that there are going to be people that are going to hate on you. You can control whether or not you carry your message to the people that were born to hear it. And so these are examples of things that you can write down in your can't and can control. And so that's the second principle. So first principle, second principle, done. So the third principle is we now have theory. Okay. And so for Mercedes, it was, I can't control that, I could do all these things. I can't control if I focus. So the real question was, what is a specific piece of uncomfortable work that we needed to do over the next 28 days? Like something tangible and practical. And so I don't remember what yours was. I can come up with an example.
To say no to 10 people, I think.
Oh, there was actually a contract. You had a contract that you needed to say no to.
Yeah.
That was scary as F.
That's scary as hell, for sure.
Yeah. So Mercedes had a contract that had real good revenue coming in for her that wasn't in her focus area. And so part of her uncomfortable work was to say no to that contract.
Yeah.
I'm scared just remembering that.
But it was, it was so good now, now looking back on it, but at the time it was like surrendering that outcome was terrifying.
Totally. And so like I recently did this where I said no to social media, and I was like, I couldn't control that I don't like social media. I could control that if I focus on serving the members of my program. And so my uncomfortable work was to create a video that explained why I was getting off of social media and to stop posting. And that was my 28-day uncomfortable work. If you're sitting on one that's hide a weakness, it might be, I need to go ask someone for help. And then you write down the specific person or the specific thing that you're going to ask for help for. If it's a difficult conversation, I'm going to go ahead and have that difficult conversation, saying, I'm going to have this difficult conversation, and you write the person. But the point is, on a piece of paper, you write the third principle, do uncomfortable work. And underneath that, you think about, if I was going to practice rigorous authenticity and say no, share the weakness, have the difficult conversation, if I'm going to surrender the outcome and not focus on what I can't control and only focus on what I can control, what will success look for me in the next 28 days? What's one concrete piece of action that I can take in the next 28 days? And you write that down. And I'm not going to do the reflection because that's a little bit more advanced. But the last thing that you write down underneath that is why this matters to you. And so you got to think about why this matters to you. For Mercedes, it was that she had a calling and she wanted to focus on that calling, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I knew if I just kept saying yes to shit because of money or because of wanting love from those people that were asking and taking on responsibilities that I should be saying no to, I wouldn't ever reach the goal I was after.
So same thing for me with the social media stuff. I had a lot of, people online, and then I had a lot of people in my program, and I was like, I can't serve both effectively. At the end of the day, I'm here not for, let's say, ego or publicity. I'm here to actually change lives. And so anything that's detracting from me helping them, which creating social media content for me was, because it's so bad, I'm so bad at it. It was, I need to double down on them. And so theoretically, if you're following along, you now have some version of an action card where, I'm just going to recap it. You've got practice rigorous authenticity, surrender is the first section, surrender the outcomes, the second section, do uncomfortable works, the third section. Why this matters to me is the fourth one. Under the first section for practice rigorous authenticity, you've written what your mask is, whether it's saying yes or hiding a weakness, avoiding difficult conversations, holding back your unique perspective. Under surrender the outcome, you've written one thing that you can't control and one thing that you can. Under do uncomfortable work, you've decided on one concrete specific piece of action that you're going to take in the next 28 days that is mask free. And the tip here is, it's not clear if you don't know exactly who it's with. You have to know who it's with, and then it becomes real. And then why this matters to me is the last section. You're just writing why does it matter to take this mask off? Why does that matter to you? And so now you have an action card. I'll tell them what to do with it, but am I missing anything for the group, do you think?
No, I think that's great. I mean, I'm going to try and make it more tangible for anyone listening as well, to see if I can put like a PDF link on the show notes, but I don't know if that's possible or not. So I don't want to promise it, but I mean, it's broken down into those steps as we've gone over. So I feel like the idea is gone. We've got the idea across. And for me, and that reflective piece that you were talking about, a lot of it was about that action over insight, and really just remembering to do the hard work and the uncomfortable work of saying no, or delineating what is actually getting me towards my goal and what is detracting from my goal, So I hope people use it as a practice, because for me, it seriously changed my life, Michael. And I wrote out my action card, just like we're talking about here. And yes, it's going to take you 15 minutes or whatever, and then it's going to change your life forever. I put a copy on my mirror where I brushed my teeth. I put a copy I had like a stand next to my computer. So like places where I would see it every day. And then of course I was working with you at the time while I had this card in action, and you were my sponsor for it. So like every time I would say no, I had 10 no's I had to get. I think it was in a 30-day period or something.
Yep.
And so every time I would say no, I would have to email you, because you were my sponsor I chose. And we would communicate about what happened there basically. And that was a huge turning point for me to realize like where I'm filling my life with shit that does not, on my deathbed, I'm going to be like, fuck, I missed out on so much of what I was here to do because I was busying myself with stuff that I wasn't here to do.
Totally. And so one thing that you just like pointed out, so there's more to the action cards of what we went through. We wanted to give you guys a taste. There are some additional things. So like Mercedes talked about it, where some people will also challenge, they'll know they have to have a difficult conversation with a specific person, but then to build that muscle, they'll challenge themselves to have like 4 difficult conversations or 10 difficult conversations over the course of 28 days. And then they'll commit to check in with someone about it. And one of the reasons that's so important is it fights the reward center in our brain that gets high when we say yes to something, or when we avoid a difficult conversation, because essentially when we take off a mask, we're risking rejection from other humans. And so if you're working with someone else, so when Mercedes would have to go say no, she would have to go send an email to me. She knew that I would value that. And so we get to be part of a tribe together of people that say no, fighting a world that's going to give you a lot of kudos if you say yes. And so that's why we need a sponsor when we go through it. And also I go around now and I train all these leaders, all these companies. And at the end of it, after they create their card, I tell them like, at least half of you will relapse. And the reason why is because you won't read this card 1 minute a day. And so you talked about putting it up where you brush your teeth, but I'll just say to anybody that wants to write this out and do this, the key is not doing it. The key is reading it. You have to read it at least 15 times over a 28-day period for it to have its effect, because that's what it takes for it to become committed to memory. And then here's what it does. It rewires your fight or flight response. So the next time you get offered an opportunity, let's say that you want to say yes to, and you get scared of what'll happen if you say no, reading that card every day, reading, I can't control this. I can't control this. This is what my uncomfortable work is. This is why it matters to me. It will take you out of that fight or flight response. It'll stop the adrenaline from flowing through your body, and you'll make a better decision. And so we've got people in our program all over the world now that are like, when I read this card 15 times, basically every day, the goal is every day. I got someone that, couldn't make a cold call for 4 years. She's making $10,000 a month selling.
Yeah.
I got another person that's got, a terrible boss, and they like left. Like there's people that have changed their lives just because they read the card. So you have to read the card, and it just means that it's like 1 minute a day. So you got to put it somewhere you're going to read it. A lot of people put it where they brush their teeth.
Yeah, I know a lot of people are writing this off right now, because that's probably some shit I would do when just listening to it, especially. But I know it's so simple too. So it makes you go like, how can that be the thing that's going to change things? But like you're saying, Michael, like it does, because you see it every day, because it becomes part of your energy space. Like it becomes part of you when you are creating essentially like a mantra in your head about it. And I actually found my action card from then. I'm going to just share it for the people who can see on the webinar.
I wonder how close I actually was from what I remembered.
What's that?
I wonder if I remembered it correctly.
Yeah, you're pretty damn close. I mean, we have some extra things on here, but
yeah.
So my mask is saying yes when I should say no. Surrendering the outcome section, I have what I can't control is how people respond when I say no, if anxiety arises in me, and if people will love me or not. And then the I can control section is how I manage my time, how organized I am, and if I prioritize my personal needs over busy work. And my uncomfortable work was asking myself, did I choose myself over busy work? My mask-free action was reading the card daily, acquiring 5 no's over the next 28 days, and schedule 5 yeses. That was a big piece of it.
That's right.
And then after every meal I had to look inward and see if I'm ignoring my needs. So like, because during eating, when most people like scroll through their phone or watch TV or whatever. So it was like, I had to sit with my food and just like feel what was going on inside of me and see if I had needs that weren't being met by me, because I'm very abusive to myself. So, or was at least. And then why this matters to me was because my ability to be potent alchemist and artist and steward requires this work. This requires me working this action card. And that shit worked, y'all. It worked for me.
Actually, you made me think about how I talk about it, because you're right. Like I was in there, I'm like, I would write it off too. So I love sports. And so like watching an NBA player shoot threes, I love watching them drain threes. The reason that they're able to be successful at doing that is because they take a ton of shots in practice. And so we love high performance athletes in our culture. We're trying to make you a high performance athlete and actualizing your potential in your own freaking life. So you know what? Why don't you take some freaking shots and get your 3-point game on and just read this card? And I promise you, you will be Steph Curry in no time flat.
Yeah. And that does actually, we had a couple more questions for you. I want to move into some from the Q&A section as well, but I do want you to touch on, I just bring it all together here of why removing our masks makes us a better leader. Like you're talking about this practice that's just like needed in order to get there.
So number one, because it's a practice, it's not one moment. You now have a tool set to integrate everything that you learned that can make you your best self. You now have a tool set to remember it and actually translate it into action. So you can like grow forever. You can read a book, watch a podcast, whatever, and integrate into this action card every 28 days. We do a new one every 28 days, and you can continue to grow and actually remember the things that you wanted to become. Practically speaking, I did an assessment. Now I've got over 3,000 leaders around the world that have taken this assessment. I've worked with like 5 different divisions within Google, 4 different divisions within Dell, people from the boardroom to the mailroom to the classroom to the living room. And 90% of leaders are wearing these 4 masks. And one of the